Once again, good morning to our audience in the UK and good afternoon to everyone joining us from India. A very warm welcome to today's session, Unlocking New Horizons, Exploring the UK India FTA Opportunity. The proposed free trade agreement between the UK and India has the potential to reshape trade and investment flows, opening doors for businesses on both sides. Today, we are here to explore what this means in practice, the opportunities, challenges, and strategies that can help companies succeed in this evolving landscape. Here how the session will flow. Short keynote insight from our speaker, followed by a panel discussion, and finally, audience Q&A. Before we begin, let me briefly introduce our keynote speakers. Chris Hayes, Director of UKIBC. Chris is a chartered accountant with extensive international experience. At UKIBC for 7 years, he has led sectors such as financial services, sport betting, gaming, and energy transition. He now heads the consulting division supporting companies across the UK-India trade corridor. Ankur Gupta, partner SW India, a chartered accountant with more than 17 years of experience in indirect taxes, including GST, custom, and allied regulations. He leads SW India's indirect tax practice, advising clients on tax strategy, M&A transactions, dispute resolution, and incentives, while also helping business automate compliance process. Neil Ensign, partner Blick Rothenberg with 30 years experience across Big Four and industry. Neil specializes in advising owner-managed business on acquisition, sales, restructuring, and tax-efficient strategies. Chantal Van Strykeren, partner Blick Rothenberg, with over 20 years in international and transaction tax. Chantal advised corporates, family offices, private equity, and state-owned enterprises on acquisition, disposals, reorganization, and refinancing across multiple industries. Our first speaker is Chris, who will share his views on bilateral advantage investment opportunities for UK and Indian companies. Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Manisha, and a huge thanks to Blick Rothenberg and SW for putting on this fantastic webinar. Delighted to be here. As Manisha mentioned, I'm one of the directors at UK India Business Council. We're a not-for-profit strategic advisory and consultancy company. To date, we've supported over 850 companies on their UK-India trade corridor journey. And today, as mentioned, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the free trade agreements. But before I do that, I think it's important that we set the scene. And I'm going to give you a quick whistle-top tour of how the UK-India relationship has developed, where we are now, and most importantly, what the new UK-India Free Trade Agreement means for businesses in both the UK and in India. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide, please.
Chris, I have jumped to the slide number 5.
Okay, sorry, it should be on slide number 3, India by digits. Okay. Sorry, it's not showing on my screen, it's just showing, anyway.
Yeah, so we are on the screen slide number 3.
Perfect, thank you very much. So just to start off with, there are so many stats about the UK and India. And as I'm an accountant by trade, I love numbers, so I thought I'd give you a few here. As many of you will know, India is the largest population on the planet, but perhaps many of you didn't know that over the next decade, India will account for 20% of global growth. So a huge transition that India is going to be going through and going to be an economy that lots and lots of people are looking at. It's already the 4th largest economy after overtaking the UK last year and Japan this year, but it's projected to be the 3rd largest economy by 2027, overtaking Germany. I think a huge opportunity for UK businesses looking at the Indian market is the size of the middle class, which has doubled from the period of 2005 to 2022 to 400 million people. This demographic change represents a huge opportunity, as I mentioned, for UK companies, particularly in the premium space. And let's not forget the median age of the average person in India is still only 29. And one stat that I really love as well is that over £500 billion will be spent on energy investments in India over the next decade. Next slide, please. On the UK side, obviously, apart from our sporting prowess, I won't mention the cricket, which happened recently, you're most likely to know the UK for its financial services hub. It's the second largest in the world. The UK is also very good at innovation, and it's the third largest tech hub in the world after the US and China. And both of these stats are even more incredible given that when we look at the population size, we're actually only the 22nd largest country in the world. The NHS in the UK is the world's 5th largest employer. And one stat that I always love to say is that 25% of all satellites that go into space start off their life in the UK. Next slide, please. At this point, I just wanted to give you some examples of the companies that have been successful in both the UK and India. So starting from UK companies in India, JCB, you will know, no doubt of seen their bright yellow diggers across many of the roads. They started their India journey in 1979. Now they operate 6 state-of-the-art factories, employ over 7,000 people directly. Rolls-Royce maintain 5 sites across India, employing 1,000 highly skilled engineers at their R&D centres in Pune, where they focus on marine and power systems, and in Bangalore, where they focus on aerospace products. Radio Design, who manufacture radio frequency solutions to mobile networks, defence and aerospace markets. They're headquartered in Shipley here in the UK. They've recently expanded with a global operations and manufacturing facility in India as well. And Biocomposites from Kiel, again in the UK, are supplying hospitals in India with medical devices for use in complex bone joint infections. And finally, one that we're very proud of here at UKIBC is a company called PJ Valves, who are a global manufacturer and supplier of valves into the energy industry. We supported them on their journey into India, and now you can see from the slide that they are one of the fastest growing companies over in India. But also, as you can see from this slide, those fast growing companies cover a range of sectors, whether that is business services, technology or energy. One thing all these companies had in common is that they understood that India was a long-term strategic play and not a quick win, and they baked that into their decision making. Next slide, please. On the UK side, Indian companies have also been successful in the UK, and most notably is in the IT sector. Tata, for instance, has a presence in the UK since 1907 and has interests in steel, consulting, chemicals, communications. You'll obviously be aware that they own Jaguar Land Rover and, of course, the famous British tea brand Tetley. It's the largest UK industrial employer. Aisha, who bought Royal Enfield in 1994, and they really started a trend where we've recently seen TVS Motors acquire Norton Motors and Mahindra by BSA, which is Birmingham Small Arms. L&T Foods have recently expanded their presence in the UK, building a state-of-the-art warehouse facility to meet the growth and demand for the UK for rice and rice-based products. And Sudhir Power created its UK subsidiary in 2016 to support its growing power generation business. Like with the UK side, you can see that there is a lot of various sectors that are covered in terms of those fast growing opportunities from Indian companies in the UK, covering IT, software, engineering and financial services. Next slide, please. At this point, I wanted to start to talk about the UK free trade agreements, but I guess there's some important context, which is that the UK-India relationship is very much two-way. India remains the second largest investor in the UK, according to the Department of International Trade. There are 1,200 Indian-owned companies operating in the UK. Together, they have a combined turnover of £33 billion and employ around 125,000 people. There are almost 700 UK companies operating in India, and they have a slightly higher turnover of 47 billion and employ around 500,000 people. And in recent years, this partnership has been formalised through a number of government-to-government dialogues. The UK-India Comprehensive Strategic Partnership drove this increased collaboration, and that was signed in 2021. Before this, UK-India trade stood at just £23 billion. By 2024, this figure had reached £42.6 billion, almost doubling. And this really laid the groundwork for the landmark UK-India Free Trade Agreement, signed last month after 14 rounds of negotiation. It of course matters when the fourth and the sixth largest economies in the world do this trade deal. The deal is expected to increase trade by a further £26 billion, with more than 60% of that coming on the UK side, expanding the UK economy by £4.8 billion. Next slide, please. On the UK side, the deal will slash tariffs on key products such as Scotch whisky, automotive components and cars, medical devices, and it will lock in reductions on 90% of tariff lines for UK exports. India's average tariff on UK products will drop from 15% to just 3%, which means British companies selling products to India will find it easier in the very price-sensitive market. Faster customs clearance and simplified procedures will give UK companies a competitive advantage also. And greater market access to telecommunications, financial services and professional services will help access to finance as well as local finance solutions. And finally, on the UK side, they will have access to 40,000 new tender opportunities in India worth £38 billion. Next slide, please. On the India side, the UK will eliminate tariffs on 99% of exports from India. Sectors to benefit most will be textiles, agriculture and precious gems. The agreement encourages greater technology collaboration, including in key areas critical to both economies, including advanced manufacturing, digital trade and clean energy. And the Double Contributions Convention will exempt Indian employees on a temporary UK visa from making social security contributions for up to 3 years, supporting over 60,000 IT professional services who work here annually. So in conclusion, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention, of course, that UKIBC can support you on any part of your journey. And if we click to the final slide, you'll see there are 2 QR codes on the screen. The first is an access to my LinkedIn profile. Please feel free to follow me. The second is far more interesting, and that's our UKIBC FTA readiness survey. This will take you 5 to 10 minutes maximum to complete, and it will allow you to understand how you can benefit the most from the UK-India FTA. By completing this, you will receive a report giving you a score and showcasing areas perhaps that you need to think of or concentrate on to help you maximise that. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Chris, for those valuable insights, and apologies for the technical glitch in the starting of the webinar. We will definitely share the presentation of Chris and the entire speakers with all the registered participants and the attendees. Moving on to our next speaker is Ankur Gupta. He will unpack the FTA, explaining what it means and how it translates into practical terms for businesses on both sides. Ankur, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thanks, Manisha. And thanks, Chris. It's more, while you have covered it briefly, I'll cover the FTA in a more detailed side. And welcome all. Let me start with this first slide on the background. So the agreement that is signed in July. It dates back to the discussions dates back to 2022. So the negotiations initiated in January 2022 aim to strengthen post-Brexit economic ties and boost bilateral trade between India and UK from $50 billion in 2021 to $120 billion by 2030. Following in 2021, there was an enhanced trade partnership, which was announced by Mr. Narendra Modi and Boris Johnson in May 2021. So there were subsequent rounds between which alternated between London and New Delhi, and an ambitious Diwali 2022 deadline set by Mr. Johnson was missed. Further progress stalled due to disagreements on visa access for Indian professionals, UK's proposed carbon border adjustment mechanism, data protection regulations. And then in 2024, both India and UK saw general elections, now with Mr. Keir Starmer becoming UK Prime Minister in July 24. So the change in leadership prompted this renewed efforts, and with round 15, which happened between Feb 24 to May 6, 2025, proving the decisive one, leading to an agreement, which in principle was agreed on May 6, 2025. The FTA was formally signed on July 24, 2025, during Mr. Modi's visit to London. The process now awaits legal text finalization, which is expected in another 3-4 months, and then ratification by UK Parliament and Indian Union Cabinet. So the expected timeline is 2026 before we finally see it becoming live. Next slide. So in terms of trade volume, so as Chris has already highlighted, India's trade with UK reached $56 billion, with India enjoying a 11.5 billion surplus. India exported 13.5 billion in goods and 18.4 billion in services, while imports from UK were $8.8 billion in goods and $12.6 billion in services. UK is India's second largest IT and business service market after the US. On the other hand, India is 11th largest trading partner to UK, accounting for 2.4% of total UK trade. The next two blocks cover the key products that both the countries trade. On the export side from India, there we have seen the rising trend based on the data published, on which refined oil and clothing being the two major products comprising of 20% of total exports to UK. Whereas on the other hand, iron and steel, which forms the last of the list, but has seen a very good growth compared to previous years, which runs into more than 50% year on a year. On the tariff side, this FTA, I feel, is the most ambitious tariff liberalization schedule till date India has signed with any of the countries, particularly given that the traditional high tariff India imposes on range of goods. While a number of tariff reductions were already known, but these schedules provide new clarity on timelines, quotas, and carve-outs for each sector in both UK and India. UK has agreed to eliminate tariffs on 99% of Indian goods, while retaining tariffs on certain food products like sugar, pork, and chicken. UK has also agreed to remove tariffs on Indian vehicles, but with a quota for electric and hybrid vehicles, which varies by value, starting from 17,600 vehicles for 6 years after the agreement enters into force. On the other hand, India has opened its door with 89.5% of tariff lines, which covers approximately 91% of total UK's export. So Indian tariffs on UK goods will be reduced gradually with different rates in a phased manner, applying the what kind of products we are dealing with. For example, where India is building domestic capacity from the programs like Make in India or production link incentives, the rates would be reduced gradually over the period of 5, 7, 10 years as India develops those capabilities. Next slide, please. Now, dwelling on the good side, so primarily the labor-intensive Indian sectors like textile, leather, footwear, marine products, gems and jewelry, alongside fast-growing sectors like engineering goods, auto components, and organic chemical will see duty reductions. So on the textile side, FTA grants zero duty market access to India's textile and clothing sector, and this covers more than 1100 tariff lines and eliminating duty of 12%, which contributed approx 11.7% to trade barriers. What it means is that this dismantles India's duty disadvantage compared to countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Cambodia, which enjoy duty-free access to UK markets. Now, India's textile exports to UK, which is now valued at 1.43 billion, still lags behind much based on the global exports that the India does, which is close to $36.7 billion, while UK itself imports $26.95 billion in textile. So this FTA's tariff elimination enhances India's competitiveness, positioning sectors like ready-made garment, home textiles, carpets, and handicrafts for exponential growth. In the next sector, if we talk about the leather and footwear exports, so globally, India does a 5 billion export of these products, which includes 276 millions to UK. Now, the UK market itself is a 8.5 billion market. So there's a huge room for the Indian exporters as the SETA eliminates duty up to 16% on leathers, synthetic products, fur, footwear, and components, and giving a zero duty access to these products. This also positions India to enable it to outperform countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Cambodia, Turkey, and Bangladesh, especially in the UK retail sector. If we go by the estimates, India's leather and footwear exports to UK could surpass $900 million, which is double of what we are currently doing. And in the long term, we can be the top three suppliers on this sector. Similarly, on capital goods and machinery, UK's top goods exported to India includes non-ferrous metal, metal ores and scrap, as well as intermediate mechanical power generators. So most of these involves raw materials, equipments for India's infrastructure and manufacturing sector. So these products will also provide Indian importers affordable capital machinery, whether it's factory equipment or renewable energy, aiding domestic productivity. Apart from these, as Chris also highlighted, on the liquor side, India will reduce its current 150% tariff on Scotch whisky to 75% over 3 years, with further reduction to 30% under a quota of 2 million liters annually. On the automobile sector, India will lower tariffs from 100% to 50% for up to 10,000 units annually, covering primarily the electric and hybrid vehicles. Moving on to next slide. So on the rules of origin, this SETA establish clearly the rules that will qualify for the preferential treatment. If the goods are wholly obtained, goods are entirely produced in India or UK using exclusively Indian or UK material. The third are the goods that use non-originating materials but satisfy the product-specific rules of origin. So India and UK have also established a co-equal rules of origin, which whereby originating goods can claim any of the listed product specific rules of origin to claim preferential treatment. For example, the smartphones covered under HS code 8517 manufactured in India. So a Indian exporter can claim Indian origin on the basis that it has either undergone a change in tariff of subheading, second, meets the standard qualifying value content under the setter. So Indian exporter can choose either of the two provisions to take benefit of the preferential treatment under the setter. Also, this rules of origin chapter covers detailed lists of operations that fail to qualify a good for preferential treatment and set out the tolerance threshold for goods not meeting the product specific rules of origin. So, for example, in textiles, attaching accessories like straps, bands, beads will not qualify as a value addition. So, based on this, unless and until the Indian exporter or the UK exporter qualify or these rules of origin criteria, the benefits can be availed through these formulas. Next slide. On the service sector, under the SETA, India has made commitments across 11 broad service sectors and 108 subsectors. For instance, India has offered commercial presence, that is, Mode 3 avenues for investment in sectors like accounting and auditing, financial services, telecom, environmental science, and auxiliary air transport services. Meanwhile, the UK has made services commitments on 12 broad service sectors, 137 subsectors, and in particular, UK has offered to India market access in sectors like telecom, ITES, other education services, business and professional services, telecom, aviation, tourism, and travel related services. Both parties have also agreed to negotiate a double contribution convention, which aims to provide relief to temporary Indian workers in the UK and their employers from having to contribute to UK's social security schemes. While talks on the double contribution convention are pending, the SETA itself requires that it enters into force together with this agreement. So we'll have to just wait and watch on this aspect. The second part is on the government procurement. So India and UAE SEPA, which was signed earlier, couple in 2022, was the first Indian trade agreement in which India agreed to open its government procurement market through limited but progressive market access commitments. India-UK setup marks further liberalization of the Indian government procurement market, as India has provided additional market access commitments for uh, procurements conducted by central government ministries, departments, and their attached entities. However, similar to India and India-UAE SEPA, state governments and entities have been kept outside the ambit of these provisions. So under SETA, UK suppliers have been made eligible to participate as Class 2 local suppliers under India's public procurement order, subject to a minimum 20% UK origin content in the product or service. On the other hand, on digital trade, the digital trade chapter contains many provisions such as those on trade facilitation by electronic means, open government data, online consumer protection, source code protections, and cybersecurity. So this is primarily what is covered in the FTA. I've tried to capture more or less on both goods and services side, but the provisions and the agreement itself is too huge to be covered in this webinar. But we'll be happy to address any questions at the end of the webinar. And that's it from my side. Over to you, Manisha. Manisha, you are mute.
Is it worth me speaking now? I can't hear Manisha, but it might be worth, I don't know whether people can hear me.
I can't hear her either.
Yes.
Yeah,
I can hear you, Neil and Chris.
I can hear you
Okay.
both, but I can't hear Manisha.
Okay, let's kick
Am I
it off,
audible?
Neil.
Now,
We can
yes.
hear you.
Now we can hear you.
I think there is some issue with my screen or with my network. I'm really giving apologies for that. Now we turn to the UK perspective. I would like to invite Neil and Chantel to give the perspective on the UK tax landscape for inbound businesses, sharing insight on how Indian companies can navigate the UK market effectively under the FTA. Neil and Chantel, over to you.
Thank you. Let me just introduce the two of us. We're both tax partners, I think, as Manisha has already said, in Blick Rothenberg. We're going to share this very, very short slot on UK taxation. This is, I mean, let me put this in perspective. The FTA really has says very little about tax at all. There's a little bit about social security, which has been mentioned already, and we'll pick that up in our slides. But I think the point of adding this particular session in is to highlight that while some of the barriers to entry are decreasing under the FTA, we still need to be mindful of what the UK tax landscape looks like in the UK for Indian investors. So next slide.
Yes, Neil. So not only from a tax perspective, but why choose the UK? As Chris already mentioned, the UK is the 6th largest economy in the world, but also we are the 5th largest for global innovation. And why is the UK often seen as so important? It can also be because of our central time zone, which gives us access to multiple markets. Yeah, we have all been on these calls either very early in the morning or late in the evening. And the UK seems to be like catching both sides around the world. But also the inclusive ecosystems support collaboration and growth in key sectors like not only financing, but the fintech, creative and life sciences. So where does it all come down to is talent. Yeah, we have a very highly skilled talent pool with access to multiple languages because of so many people come to the UK and want to be part of that. And that's also because of our 90 outstanding universities, including 4 in the top 10. Yeah, and I even read this morning that the UK is maybe even better than the US. We can have a different discussion about that. Our diverse workforce, but also our legal system. Yeah, we have a very stable and well-respected legal system. And it is very easy to set up a UK limited company only in a few hours, max a few days. But also, in addition to like Chris and the UKIBC, we also have the support from the Department for Business and Trade. They promote finances and international trade investment in the UK, as well as the Office for Investments, supporting high value investment opportunities. So not only tax, it's a lot of like a full picture of why choosing the UK. I think next slide. Neil?
Thank you. Let me pick up some of the headlines in terms of what UK corporates or UK businesses are likely to face in terms of taxation. I could spend obviously hours on this, but we'll scamper through some of the headlines. I'm not going to talk about here personal taxation, although clearly we need to bear that in mind. Of course, income tax is at a range of between 20 and 45%. And there's some rule changes, of course, for non-DOMs, which is scaring some off. Let's leave that to one side for the moment, just concentrate on some of the taxes that are borne directly by a UK business. Corporation tax, as many of you are aware, will be a figure that you'll be interested in. 25% I've put here. That's not strictly correct. There is a 19% rate, but it's for very low levels of profits. And I think the mindset should be that a lot of international business, particularly large corporates with lots of group companies, those will find themselves paying at the 25% rate. And that applies, and we'll talk a little about this on the next slide, that applies not only to UK resident companies, so companies that are either incorporated in the UK or those that might be incorporated outside the UK and managed and controlled in the UK, so UK resident companies, but also non-resident companies, so Indian resident companies, which are trading in the UK through a fixed place of business, a branch, an office, what the tax legislation might call a permanent establishment. Those profits from that trading activity will be taxed at the UK corporation tax rate, which is applicable, which will probably be 25%. There's also other taxes to bear in mind. There's withholding taxes on interest and royalties. The default rate in the UK is the basic rate of income tax, which is at 20%. That is always subject to a reduction if there's a treaty, usually. So the UK-India treaty, for example, has a reduced rate on interest at 15%, and depending on the type of royalty, 10 or 15%. So there are some withholding taxes which need to bear in mind. That may well be simply a timing issue and not necessarily an absolute tax disadvantage. But anything which would reduce that is clearly to companies' advantages, and it's a shame not to see some change of that, perhaps introduced by the FDA. The UK stands out in having a very beneficial rate of withholding on dividends that are paid out, and there is no UK withholding tax, and the UK stands above many other countries in that respect. Moving on to another level of taxation that needs to be borne in mind, and that's a tax on employing people in the UK. That is a 15% social security tax, national insurance contributions, as they're called here. And as has already been explained by Anka, there is an opportunity under the new negotiated double contribution convention between the UK and India for workers coming to the UK from India not to pay UK national insurance contributions, or for the employer to pay their own national insurance contributions, because it's borne at both the employee and employer level, not to pay those for up to 36 months. So some help there, and some symmetry with some of the other conventions that the UK has signed. There's also potentially an apprenticeship levy of 0.5%, but only for larger employers. That we can talk about in a bit more detail. I know Chantel's got a slide on that. Primarily a cost on the end consumer, but not always, and it can get very complicated for inbound investors. So next slide, please. This slide highlights perhaps why the 25% might be slightly lower, but also why it might be slightly higher. The opportunities on the left-hand side. So the left-hand side is opportunities, and the right-hand side are some of the challenges. I'll deal with the opportunities, and I'll be good cop. Chantel will be bad cop and tell you why there's some issues in the UK. What I can tell you, we've talked about innovation already. The UK government and lots of governments over the period of time have championed UK innovation, and as we know, it's been a successful trait in the UK economy, and there is significant spend on R&D in the UK by large and small companies alike, and they are supported through tax incentives in the UK. So we have an R&D tax credit that's become, in theory, more simple. I would argue that it probably hasn't, but there is an R&D tax credit which is relevant for both SMEs and for larger corporates. The rate is essentially about 26% of tax credits for smaller companies, and that decreases to around 16% for the larger companies. But it is something that many companies that we look after file and claim R&D tax credit claims. We also have a patent box regime, and that allows certain companies to reduce their effective rate of tax down to 10%, so anywhere between 25 and 10. We also have tax relief on capital spend. Not all capital spend, but a lot of capital spend now. That is 100% under what's called the annual investment allowance, up to £1 million, and to the extent that spending increases beyond £1 million, we have full expensing on certain expenditure at 100%. So, for example, if you have a £10 million profit in the business and you spend £10 million on qualifying spend, which attracts the 100% tax relief, you get £10 million tax deduction, reducing your profits to zero. So certainly a very attractive provision in our tax legislation. We mentioned before no withholding tax on dividends, which again is a notable advantage for UK corporates, and along with the participation exemption, which I refer to below, which allows certain dividends, or many dividends, to be received by UK corporate tax-free, and for many corporate sales of trading companies to be tax-free as well. The UK is still firmly established as a place of choice for holding companies of international entities. The UK sits very well and competes very well with other countries which are seen to be favourable for holding companies and groups. We've got an extensive tax treaty network, the largest, I think there's 131 treaties. Again, since we've come out of the EU, that also is very useful indeed in relation to cross-border transactions with the EU countries. And finally, I'd put this as an opportunity. and it could also be seen as a challenge. I mentioned before that UK non-resident companies are subject to tax in the UK to the extent they are trading through a permanent establishment in the UK. It is really important to take time to consider what profit should be attributed to that UK trading activity. And in Blick Rothenberg, is a selling point. We have experts who can help with that. And it may well be, of course, that you can trade with the UK without being subject to tax, without creating a permanent establishment, and escape UK tax altogether. Now, that may or may not be a great thing in the scheme of things, particularly if that profit is going to be taxed in India in any case at probably a high rate. But it may well be something to look into in terms of cash flow and simplicity in terms of what we want to do in the UK. And transfer pricing, profit attribution is really a subset of transfer pricing. Transfer pricing is really relevant, of course, impacts larger corporates than smaller corporates, but nevertheless, there are opportunities to make sure that to the extent there is cross-border transaction with the UK, if you can mitigate the taxation in the country which perhaps has the highest level of effective tax, then transfer pricing has an absolute tax advantage. Chantal.
Great. Well, thank you, Neil, for the opportunities. We go back to the previous slides around key challenges before we go into VAT. And that is probably no one can look at the UK news or open a new UK newspaper at the moment without seeing anything about potential black holes of billions in the UK. And our Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, needed to fill those by increasing taxes. And that is a challenge because that gives uncertainty around what will happen to corporates before they make their decisions to make investments. Luckily, our autumn budget is at the end of October or the beginning of November. The date hasn't been set yet. As some people know, Labour has promised that they will not touch the rates for income tax, corporate tax, or VAT. However, the black hole is quite large at the moment. So it may be that they have to break that promise, but let's see where we go. So definitely something to take a view on. The other thing is, in order to get more taxes in earlier, we have accelerated tax payments for large corporates. So instead of paying the taxes within 9 months after your book year, large corporates have to pay within the year in 4 installments. So again, you don't have to do filings, but you need to make sure you're paying on time, or otherwise there will be high interest rates to pay. With all these things and all the investment made by the UK government, unfortunately, our tax code hasn't become easier. It has become increasingly more complex. And also we have had a lot of anti-avoidance rules. So this is something to make sure you are aware of when you make those investments into the UK. And as Neil also mentioned, there is more scrutiny from HMRC on cross-border transactions and structuring. We see HMRC especially around transfer pricing to improve their investigations, sending out letters to companies that they believe are based in the UK and asking them first a few small questions and see whether they want to do investigations. So therefore, it is important to have the right advisors. And as Neil mentioned, we at Blick Rothenberg are able to help on these things around investigations, but also transfer pricing and profit attributions in general. So just a few challenges. I don't think they overshadow the opportunities. I think the UK is still a great place to do business in. Next slide, please. And indirect tax, because the new deal between UK and India may have or will improve around customs. VAT in itself is not touched. However, Neil already mentioned that VAT is only a cost for the end customer. That said, it may still be that you as a business have to comply with the VAT registration requirements and other filings. In January 2021, the UK implemented a special regime, and we have seen in the last 12 months a lot about these regimes because the UK is not the only one, the US have them as well. And that is to improve the sales of goods by overseas sellers. So goods that are outside the UK, there will not be any import duty or import VAT collected at the point of importation if the value of those goods do not exceed £135. The overseas seller will be required to register an account for UK VAT on the sales unless it is sold via an online marketplace. And this is why we have so many online marketplaces that are doing so well, especially for goods that are not exceeding the £135. It should be noted that the UK do not allow customers to act as an importer, nor do they allow the carrier to remit the VAT on behalf of the customers. So this is all for small transfer of goods and sales of goods. What about the ones that do exceed £135? Well, for those, the normal import procedures apply with VAT and potential duty payable depending on what the new treaty and trade deal says. They need to be paid and applied for either by the customer or the supplier acting as importer or record. Overseas suppliers can afford registration. So for companies in India, if all their business-to-business customers access importer. For business-to-customer sales, VAT can be accounted for by the customer or the shipping agent on behalf of the customer, again, avoiding the requirement for the overseas supplier to register. The latter is commonly referred as the fast parcel operating regime. So a few things to consider when you are selling goods into the UK. I think next slide, because we're almost at the end of our presentation, Neil. We thought to give you a takeaway, our guide to establishing a business in the UK. You can also download the guide, which gives you an overview of the UK tax and accounting implications of setting up and running a UK business. Thank you all for listening to us. I think I give it back to Manisha. Thank you.
Thank you all for setting the context so well on opportunities for India and UK businesses in both markets. We are now moving to our panel discussion on the UK-India FTA opportunity. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Nimesh Shah, CEO of Blick Rothenberg. Nimesh joined the firm in 2012 and became CEO in 2020. With over 15 years experience in personal and corporate tax, he advises entrepreneurs across sectors on their business journey from startup to exit. Recognized in leading industry awards, Nimesh also contributes regularly on media and government consultations and is passionate about simplifying the UK tax system to foster partnership. Joining him on the panel is Pancham Taneja, country head at Delta Capita. Pancham brings over 26 years of global leadership experience across financial services and aviation, a transformational executive who has previously held senior roles at Goldman Sachs and British Airways and today leads Delta Capita's expansion and business development in India. Shashi Matthew, partner CMC Indus Law. Shashi is partner with CMS Indus Law, where he leads the firm's indirect tax and international trade practice. With over 16 years of litigation and advisory experience, he has appeared before tribunal, high courts, and the Supreme Court on complex tax and fiscal matters. Shashi has advised leading companies across sectors on indirect tax, direct tax, FEMA, and foreign trade issues, and has several reported judgments on his credit. He regularly advises clients in the India, UK, and India-US business corridors. Also joining the panel is Chris, Director UKIBC, who you have already heard from earlier in the session. This panel will discuss trade opportunities, regulatory considerations, and practical strategies under the proposed FTA. We encourage our audience to participate. Please share your questions in the Q&A window, and we will take up them towards the end. Over to you, Nimish.
Thank you, Manisha, and big thanks as well to Chris, Anka, Neil, and Chantal for taking us through the detail of the UK-India Free Trade Agreement. By way of just further introduction, and thank you again, Manisha, for the very kind introduction. My background as a private client advisor in the UK for over the last 20 years, I know firsthand how important the relationship is between the UK and India. I've advised many Indian connected high net worth individuals, family offices, ultra high net worth individuals, expats moving into and out of the UK, between the UK and India in my time. Actually, Neil touched on this during his part of the presentation. The UK has some quite significant changes around our leading non-dom regime recently. And part of my experience around working with government, HMRC, Treasury at the time of the review of that non-dom regime, there was a real specific focus on the impact on Indian individuals in relation to those changes. And that discussion still continues because there has been some slightly negative press attention around the introduction of that regime, but specifically, again, focused on what the impact is on India. And again, that for me illustrates how important the UK-India relationship is at a senior government level. Now, helpfully, the UK-India estate tax treaty for inheritance tax purposes in the UK still does remain in force, and that's been explicitly confirmed by the government in the discussions so far, in writing so far, I should say, when we've had these changes in the UK. And again, illustrating that the UK is very much open for business when it comes to the UK-India relationship. So it's my pleasure and privilege actually to host and chair this panel discussion to take us to the end of our webinar today. And thank you to all my panelists. I'm sure we'll have a great discussion over the next 30 minutes. And as Manisha said, please do take the opportunity to ask our experts any questions. I'll try and get through as many as we can in the remaining time that we've got. So I wanted to start with Pancham and around what the strategic impact you believe that the UK-India Free Trade Agreement will have here, and specifically around some of the sectors that are in play here, so technology and financial services. If you can focus on those as well, Pancham, maybe we can come and talk about some of the other sectors.
Sure. Thank you, Nimish, and thank you everyone for, first of all, inviting me to this panel. It's a pleasure to be part of this webinar. And to your question in terms of the strategy around or the what does the India-UK FTA agreement holds for specifically for our sector. So I represent the BFSI, the banking financial sector. I work for a consulting firm, previously worked in banking. So from an IT services and a global capability center perspective, I think the focus area is going to be a deeper cooperation between the two countries. Obviously, we've seen that the India ecosystem of GCC is about 30 years old. We've had companies set up over here from a cost arbitrage perspective, which will still be the key in terms of setting up businesses in India. But what we are also seeing is that along with cost arbitrage, you're seeing a lot of talent, which is now not doing low-end work, which is actually doing a lot of strategic work. So the doors are open to sort of leveraging the deep talent pool that India has. I was listening to Chris's opening remarks, and he mentioned about the size of the middle class increasing in India, and also the median age at about 29 years. So that just tells you that the deep talent pool that India has, and the expectation and the aspiration that the Indian middle class has to rise. And with this, and I also feel that the India IT services sector will double the size of the business that it currently does with UK. So it'll open up a lot more doors for employment opportunities, not just in the existing sectors or the existing cities of India, But what I also feel is that there is greater potential to leverage the tier two cities and the ecosystem that India holds over there. So there is also a India GCC policy being framed up. The government is giving impetus to tier two cities to come up with the infrastructure to host various companies. What I also feel is that the lowering of guard in terms of data protection, not lowering of guard, but actually harmonization of data protection laws between GDPR and DDPD will also play a pivotal role in expanding the business opportunities. What it allows companies to do is basically do a lot of cross-border data sort of migration and transfer, and also allows for residency of data, which can actually support a lot of innovation, which can be accelerated, because currently there might be restrictions in terms of what data can flow out of UK into India, and that can probably also have restrictions on the kind of innovations. The build is being done over here, testing is done in UK, so there could be time lags, there could be understanding gaps in the thing. But once the GDPR and DDPD are harmonized and the data flow is allowed, I think it also allow for greater sort of innovation, acceleration, and the deep talent pool of India can be utilized for that. So I see opportunities just from low-cost arbitration to more strategic hubs being established in India, and also leveraging the tier two ecosystem that India has to offer. So that's my view on the IT services, the financial and the GCC sector. I'm sure other sectors have different viewpoints, and some could be similar, but happy to hear what others have to say on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pancham. I think you make a great point around the data transfer as well. That's something that I suppose from a practical perspective for GCCs in particular to be able to engage more efficiently on the UK side, and well, on both sides, I suppose. That will remove a lot of the sort of the barriers that we have to do business more efficiently across the two countries. Maybe I'll bring Chris into the conversation on this particular point as well. Chris, what other sectors do you think will benefit from the UK-India treaty?
So I think Pancham sort of touched on a really important point there around that sort of, the data centers, the global capacity centers that are obviously growing in India. And we all know that they are extremely power hungry. And obviously, as we heard in Mr. Modi's speech, India is on this transitional journey. It's already ahead of its targets in terms of its commitment to be net zero by 2070. And I think there's a huge opportunities there. The India is leading the world in terms of solar provision. The huge and largest solar farms in the world. And the UK is probably one of the leaders in wind. I've just quickly looked up, at any one time, the UK gets 30% of its energy from wind power. Now, both of those amazing technologies have one big challenge. If the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine, we still need energy. So the big area for opportunities that I see is around the energy storage side, and we're seeing huge innovation coming out of the UK, which could then transfer over to India and vice versa. I think from our side, what we're seeing is that the Indian investors that we're speaking to are tech hungry. They're looking for the latest technologies, latest opportunities to actually take that in to the Indian market. Who say, for example, on the automotive side, we're working with organizations looking for DC chargers, looking for motor technologies, etc. So I think those two areas around energy and automotive are huge. We already see Mahindra obviously delivering their EV vehicles over in India, designed probably about 40 minutes away from where I'm sat now, and that collaboration between UK and India really happening. I think the other opportunity from the UK into India, as we touched on before, is around that premium space. India is already the largest consumer or the largest taker, of Scotch whisky by volume. We're seeing that increasing, but other areas such as salmon, premium lamb, chocolates, confectionery, that's going to be a real big opportunity. And on the flip side, from India into the UK, we expect, as people mentioned before, on the textile industry, we expect that to be a huge shift at the moment. Obviously, the UK is very reliant on Indonesia, China, and some of India's neighbours. We can see India really stepping up into that area, the high quality, and around that sustainable fashion as well, which is incredibly important to UK consumers. Another big area, which has been in the headlines quite a lot recently, is around steel production. And obviously, Chinese are producing a lot of steel. The tariffs from America have meant that there is a lot of extra capacity, which is being brought into Europe. But obviously, from a government point of view, they are looking at ways to alleviate that challenge on local industries. And I can see a huge opportunity there where Indian-made steel could be, fit that bill, and there's such a high quality coming into the UK. And then finally, as I mentioned before, around that sort of whole area around gemstones, jewelry, which is India is very well known for as well. Again, that could be a huge area. So that's just a couple of the different sectors, but it's quite interesting because obviously the UK has reduced tariffs on 99% of Indian goods, even though we already had a really, really low barriers to entry already. And India's reducing on 90%. So it's almost like, well, everything's open for opportunity as well.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. Pancham, you've covered quite a broad range of sectors there, and a number of businesses will be able to leverage that opportunity quite significantly. Yeah. You also touched on Scotch whisky, which reminded me of one of our Indian partners that we work with at Blick Rothenberg. Kindly gave me a lovely bottle of Scotch whisky a few months ago. I haven't had a chance to sample it yet, but maybe Shashi, you can just talk a little bit about one of my favorite subjects, Scotch whisky, and the impact of that in the Indian supply chain. How do you think, just maybe on a more practical level though, just taking Scotch whisky as an example, because I'm interested clearly to learn more about it, but what sort of adjustments do you think businesses will need to make in order to take advantage of the FTA rules?
Yeah, thanks, Nimesh, and definitely I'm on board with you on the Scotch whisky part. For large part of the audience, at least I would hope that that's something of interest. But it comes with a sort of a bitter pill to swallow. The reason being that while the market is opened up now, and there will be, we are hoping for more imports, but alcohol in India is a state subject, right? So a large part of the taxes do come from, a large part of the price actually is comprised of state taxes. And I think for this, for the FTA to sort of completely mature in those words, the states will have to step up and reduce the taxes. From a street perspective, we will look at, say, 10 to 15% drop in the prices. But more importantly, it also gives access for a large number of UK exporters to the Indian market. And while the customs duty will reduce, I'm hoping that the state taxes will also reduce. But since you mentioned from an operational perspective, and from a supply chain perspective, what becomes important is that as an economy, we do need to level up our game in terms of licensing. So each state has its own peculiar license requirements, and it's not a federal issue, right? It's a state per state issue. So from a UK export perspective, I honestly look at more companies entering India by way of JVs rather than just setting up businesses straight off in India. Existing manufacturers definitely are going to be happy with this change, because 110 to 75% is the straight off drop in customs duty that will happen when the agreement is signed. And over the next 10 years, we'll see this significantly even drop further, not only for Scotch whisky, but also for gin. So definitely from that perspective, it is good. And now the states need to step up. In terms of supply chains, there will be some requirements, some trade facilitation that will be required. And that's anyway part of the agreement, right? And one of the conditions, in fact, is a minimum import price. And that's where the duty reduction is also there. So from a supply chain perspective, from a classification perspective, producers, manufacturers, importers in India who are especially importing bulk Scotch whisky will continue doing that, but will now have to be more careful at which prices they import, because that is one of the conditions for the preferential rates to kick in. So that definitely is, and I would think more and more. So if you look at the larger companies who are importing the bulk Scotch, they are blending in India. That business is definitely expected to take off. And as I said right at the beginning, we are going to see more SKUs, more companies enter India, and that, we're not looking at the top 4, top 5. We want the gin companies, the gin distilleries to set up shop in India. Of course, I from an operational perspective, I would believe that they would tie up with an Indian manufacturer, because that's easier to do than to set up business operations fresh.
You make a great point, Shashi, about how this opens the opportunity for more joint ventures. I didn't quite sort of appreciate that. And then a gateway for certainly the UK businesses to go outbound into India to do that, to take advantage of that. So that's a really, really great point. Away from Scotch whisky. Yeah, sorry.
Nimesh, so just one quick point on that. It's both ways as well, because obviously you're now seeing the Indian whiskey companies really coming to the fore. I remember having a Godawan whiskey when I was over in India. It was phenomenal. And obviously, you've then got Samsara gin, which every time I go, I always bring that home. So, I'm looking forward to actually having access to Indian whiskey and to Indian gin as well, which I can't really get hold of easily. So it is a two-way street.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm glad that will keep Chris happy, and I'm sure listeners on this call as well. So just let's take it away from Scotch whisky, because we'll use up all the time on gin and whiskey. But I also just want to talk about other practicalities around perishables as well, because the free trade agreement talks about this 6-hour processing window for perishable goods. But how realistic, how practical is that? So it's a great direction that the free trade agreement goes down, but is this realistic with the current supply chains that are in place? And that's maybe a question for everyone, actually.
Yeah, so the free trade agreement, while it does talk about better trade facilitation measures. From an India perspective, we are way better than what we were in the past, to be very honest. But a 6-hour window is pretty much unheard of in the Indian scenario. Let me be very honest with you. 1, 2, the FTA actually does not spell it out in terms of a 6-hour window. It does talk about faster processing for perishable goods. And that is something that India can achieve, and it will achieve. In fact, over the last few years, and being a customs lawyer myself, I have seen faster clearances, and there are different routes to ensure that you do clear your goods at the port faster than other countries. In fact, because of the FTA, that is a benefit that UK companies will have in India, and there are schemes that will also be floated by the government. But insofar as perishable goods are concerned, I think there needs to be some groundwork which needs to be done over the next few months.
Any views from Chris Pancham on that 6-hour window?
I think it's a bit challenging for perishable goods. There needs to be some level of practicality. I think 6 hours processing is fine, but I think if you're looking at making it available in the market, that window becomes a big challenge. So there needs to be a bit of a practicality around it. 18 hours, maybe 24 hours, but 6 hours seems like it's catering to the domestic market, not to the cross-border market.
Yeah, no, I agree, but I think there's also opportunities there around the technology collaboration. I think India's been on a phenomenal journey around its cold store solutions as well. I remember reading a stat that there's 50% of the food in the UK is wasted at the very end of the product life cycle, so when it's in the homes, whereas in India, 50% of it's lost in the farm. So there is opportunities around how can there be joint collaboration around agri-tech, around different technologies, and looking at how we could work together. I mentioned before, one of the companies, L&T, is really growing its UK business because of a huge demand for not just rice, but rice-based products as well. So whether that is in health supplements, whether that is in a variety of new milks that are around in the UK, replacing the traditional cow's milk. So yeah, I think the 6-hour window is challenging, but I guess it's a direction of travel as well, that which will not only benefit UK exporting globally, but also will benefit the farmers without that loss of product on the farm and bring down prices if it becomes more productive.
Yeah, I think Chris Pancham, you've hit the nail on the head really around the intent here and the direction that it's going in. It's clearly from both sides, both government sides, that there is a real desire to make this work when you have very ambitious goals like that. So that's a great direction that I think we'll see, maybe not practically immediately because the supply chains need to evolve around the free trade agreement over a period of time. But yeah, the intent is great to hear. And I was looking actually in preparation for this session, just trying to compare actually UK free trade agreements with the EU, with Australia, with Japan. When I look at this side by side, India free trade agreement between the UK and India is actually there's quite a stark difference between all the other ones, including even the EU as well. You can really see again why, from our government perspective, the belief that this will add significantly to the UK economy, and again reinforcing that intent. So it's great to see for me as well. It was quite incredible to see that difference in those free trade agreements, and again building on what we've already got. I want to take it away maybe from goods and services and people, because one of the things that I think everyone touched on in part of the presentation was around visas and the exemption on social security, which again I think is groundbreaking when I'm thinking it again from a UK perspective. But again, maybe a question for all of you around movement of talent. How do you think the free trade agreement will open up that movement of talent between the UK and India? Well, maybe let's start with Pancham.
I think it's going to accelerate the movement of talent. The cross-border mobility of professionals is just going to increase. Right now, if you're looking at mobilizing your talent to UK, in terms of applying for visa and the timelines, you just have to bake it into your project roadmap to say, okay, my talent will be available in X months, and then the deployment will happen. Now with the window shortening to I think weeks or days, it just accelerates the whole thing. And to my earlier point, it gives the boost to innovation, finding faster ways of working, accelerating things and projects. So in a way, I think at the end of the day, the companies are inadvertently going to have cost savings around it, because the more you accelerate, the faster you deliver, the better results is for the clients, and you can move on to the next best thing. So I think it's good for the talent. Either ways, you could have free flow of talent between both the countries. There's institutional knowledge which is there in UK, and that can be harnessed by the Indian counterparts. A young talent which is learning, it's capable, is available, and can be made capable. So I think that institutional knowledge can be passed off by short-term assignments, long-term assignments across the border. So definitely a boost to people as well. And I do feel that the companies will benefit from it even from a retention perspective, because if it's not a proactive tool, but definitely something that employees look forward to having collaboration across the borders or different countries, and put that experience on their resumes as worked in different geographies. So definitely a boost for win-win for all.
And Pancham, you talked about before about the impact on GCC's global capability centres. This movement of talent and freer movement of talent between the UK and India, specifically, what sort of impact will the free trade agreement have there on GCCs?
I see. I feel I think we are seeing it from India to UK, that movement of talent. But I feel that the greater impetus is going to be UK to India, because if you're looking at a cost arbitrage model, the residency of the talent in India makes greater sense. So I feel that UK talent being made available to India in terms of deployment, training, and passing on the knowledge, could help the GCCs scale up faster, which definitely I feel is the case. And also in terms of short-term assignments or even long-term assignments, the talent from India going to the UK home base, getting trained over there at the home location, and bringing the institutional knowledge back, that will get accelerated as well. So I think those avenues open up with the faster visa processing timelines.
Yeah, and so question maybe for Shashi here, strategically and how you're advising your clients around this movement of talent over the long term as well. These are exciting opportunities, but not everything is quite so clear. Yeah, this is new ground for businesses that are looking at this. But strategically, how are we looking this over the long term for businesses to take advantage of this movement of people between the two countries? Have you had any conversations with the businesses you work with so far?
Not yet, but one of the things that has come up in the past is mutual recognition of professional qualifications. And that is something that is very important from both sides. It's India to UK, UK to India. Mutual recognition of our qualifications, that becomes a very important tool, and it's also easier for people to move from one country to the other in a professional setting. One of the bigger hiccups that we have, at least on the India side, is a recognition of foreign degrees. Similarly, at least from a lawyer's perspective, that has also been put into the FTA, that professional qualifications going forward, there will be an attempt in the form of reciprocity to address that. Once that comes in, I think that will be a big game changer because a lot of the red tapeism that is there will go, and that will ensure mobility is faster. But apart from that, while the point system and other visa conditions haven't changed, hopefully this is a stepping stone to even having that, and that would be good. And just to add to that, the fact that new categories have opened up, and this will actually affect the gig workers quite a bit. New categories for chefs, musicians, and so that itself is a step towards seeing that more people will be able to access this corridor easily.
Yeah,
One,
and
one point, one point I want to make. I want to pick up on what gentleman just before me said. In terms of lawyers, I've also heard, this is anecdotal feedback, by the way. This is not directly that I understand this too much, but I've had few friends who are doctors and who wanted to work in UK. And if there is parity in terms of qualification for doctors across, I think they have to do some residential work in UK to be qualified to be at certain level of doctor. Now, to Chris's point earlier, in terms of NHS providing the largest medical care in UK, there is stress in the system over there. I understand in terms of shortage of medical professionals, whether it's doctors or nurses. I think that is a category of students or professionals who could really benefit from parity in sort of qualifications, because they do not have to gain a similar qualification when they get into UK. They can get into a residency straight away. It will really take the stress out of the system which UK is facing from an NHS perspective. I think that's a great point which was brought up, but I see that it can be utilized in various sectors.
And as a tax advisor, I just wanted to just touch on, again, remind everyone around social security exemption, because I thought this is, again, groundbreaking, incredibly generous. Again, maybe start with Chris, but I suppose, what's the government rationale on giving such a generous exemption for social security from your standpoint?
Well, if you look at it from I declared before, I'm a chartered accountant as well, so I look at it from a pure numbers point of view. You look at the UK social security system. Essentially, you're paying two elements to that. The first is you're paying for the NHS, and obviously workers coming in have to pay an NHS levy. So you would almost argue, well, you're paying twice for that. And the second element is towards a UK pension, which obviously those workers wouldn't be entitled to anyway. So essentially, the Indian government's argument was, well, we were paying things that we are not going to be able to benefit from longer term. So I think in all negotiations, there has to be give and take. And obviously this was a part where the UK government had to sort of give, especially given that the barriers to trade in the UK were far lower than what they are in India. You almost have to sort of negotiate that through. So that's the sort of the rationale that I would suggest, is that logic sort of prevailed and came through on that. And the economic benefits, as we've all mentioned, of the FTA, 5 billion additional to the UK economy, is more than actually pays for itself.
Yeah, and I do hope that exemption remains and stands the test of time. I think again Neil and Chantal in their section just touched on tax burden in the UK, and our Chancellor sort of looking behind the sofa at the moment for a few extra pounds. This on face value is a cost, I suppose, but as you rightly said, Chris, the economic impact from the UK standpoint, again talking about that, this is huge, and I think again backing the fact that the UK recognises that India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and that we want to be part of that over the long term. So I really do hope that we hold our ground and hold our nerve on that. I'm conscious of time, and we've talked around a range of topics in this panel discussion so far. I'm going to try and close things off maybe just by getting a comment from each of you, a very brief comment from each of you, is around the one thing that you think is the biggest opportunity in the UK-India Free Trade Agreement, and try and be brief. So let's start with Pancham.
I think opens doors for greater collaboration, more strategic work to be done, and the harmonization of GDPR and DPDP really puts focus on how two countries can collaborate in terms of innovation, especially across the GCC ecosystem.
Brilliant. Shashi?
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, definitely from our perspective, I would feel that this sets a foundation for greater collaboration, definitely. But more importantly, trying to remove tariff and non-tariff barriers. And that's something that this trade facilitation measures which are there in the FTA, that should definitely ease out and ease business for both UK and India. That's definitely a takeaway for me.
An immediate benefit there, isn't there? And finally, Chris.
I think it's around innovation. I think we all saw during COVID how when the UK and India really work together and complement each other, how we can solve some of the global challenges that exist. You know, we're all looking at new energy solutions, you know, the cross-border that happens in terms of university students coming both ways, and that living bridge. Don't forget, you know, the Indian heritage is 3% of the UK's population, so that building on that and maintaining that and that cross-border innovation for me is the real huge win, not just for the UK and India, but ultimately I think that'll be a win for the whole globe.
Brilliant. Well, thank you everyone for your closing remarks there, and I hope it leaves the audience with some real positivity around the long-term direction of the agreement and the relationship between the two countries. Thank you for taking part. I will hand back to Manisha for our closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nimish. Thank you all panelists for those insightful perspectives. That was a very meaningful discussions. As we close, I would like to extend our gratitude to our keynote speakers, panelists, and everyone in the audience for joining us today. Due to time constraint, we are unable to address the questions from the audience. However, we will make sure to respond to each question over email. I would also request that in case if you have any more queries or any concerns, or you would like to have some clarity regarding this webinar, you may like to send an email to manisha.sachdeva@sw-india.com, and we will try to address and respond to each of the concern and email. A recording of this webinar will be shared shortly, and you are welcome to forward it to your network. On behalf of SW and Blick Rothenberg, thank you once again for being with us. Wishing you a great day in the UK and a pleasant evening in India. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Close.